Very good.
Yes, and today we have the pleasure of having Nicoletta Corrocher from the University of Bocconi, who is the lecturer in applied economics, and she's also the research fellow at ICRIOS. ICRIOS is our close partner at Bocconi. And today's workshop would be on green technologies. We already had a few weeks ago, we had one workshop on green technologies and the adoption of green technologies. And now we have a bit different perspective on this, on patents and things like that. So I'm not going to go into any further introduction. I think I'll pass the floor now to Nicoletta. And thank you again for making yourself available for the seminar.
Okay, so thank you very much, Tarmo, and good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, given the seminar, even if online, but I hope we'll see each other soon also in presence. So the title of the seminar is Technological Regimes, Patent Growth and Catch Up in Green Technologies. And this is a joint work that I've conducted with Franco Malerba and Andrea Morrison. And basically, the papers revolves around the links between the characteristics of the technological regimes and the growth in patenting activities with specific reference to green technologies and with a specific focus on the catching up processes by successful follower countries. So, why we chose to study this topic? As you might know, there have been a set of very important changes in technological leadership across different countries, and these changes have been brought about in particular by a set of opportunities that have been put forward by the green transformation. And some countries have actually catch up with the developed countries, but in some cases we've also seen a leapfrogging for some emerging economies, and we're interested in understanding the determinants of these processes. The second motivation of the paper is that, of course, if you think about the green technological and industrial transformation, you do think about this as being really a major techno-economic and social institutional paradigm shift. And this has been particularly emphasized by Matthews in a very famous paper of 2013. And if you see here, this is the picture that depicts the rolling 10-year yield on the Standard & Poor 500 since 1814 until March 2009. And you do see the different techno-economic waves or paradigms, if you want. And there is a new one emerging, clearly emerging, which has to do with the development of green or environmental technologies. These technologies are particularly interesting because if you think about the emergence of this new paradigm, we can see that countries that are less dependent on the established technologies based on fossil fuels, basically, can actually have very innovative growth paths that are based on these green technologies, with some advantages in terms of innovation vis-a-vis existing leaders. And so it's very interesting to understand what are the conditions that lead developing countries, or if you want, industrializing countries, to catch up, and in some cases actually overtake the leaders into the process of green innovation. Um, uh, Before starting with the discussion of our paper, let me give you some additional background on the context of the paper. This is a table that comes from the OECD, and it depicts the so-called high-value green inventions that are indexed at the year 2000 as 100. Okay, so imagine that the year 2000 is the starting point. And these are data from a paper of 2015. And you do see here an index based on the simple count of patents, an index based on the percentage of green patents over total patents in different countries, and an index based on the revealed technological advantage that basically tells us to what extent a specific country is performing well as opposed to competitors. So what does the table tell us? First of all, if you look at the different countries, and in particular, if you look at OECD and BRICS, we do observe that the OECD countries has increased by 70% in total and by 69% as a percentage of total technologies, meaning that over time, so between the year 2000 and the year 2014, more or less, what happened is that OECD countries have improved their innovative activity in green technologies and in the overall technologies, more or less of the same percentage. If you look at BRICS, you do see, in particularly the second to last line, you do see an impressive increase in the index based on the simple count of green patents. Okay, the increase being 497%. However, if you do look at the increase in the percentage of green technologies over total technologies, the increase is much lower. And this tells us that part of the story of the catching up in green technologies in BRICS countries, BRICS being Brazil, Russia, India, Indonesia, China, and South Africa, is due to the fact that these countries have improved their innovative performance in the overall set of technologies. So they've become actually important actors in the patenting activity per se. And therefore, the green patenting activity is mostly a result of the overall improvement in the patenting activity. What is even more interesting, though, is the information from the revealed technological advantage, because what we do see here, remember always that the year 2000 is indexed at 100, is that Denmark, Finland, and India had an over 80% increase in green patenting. China also performed very well with a 38% increase. The OECD as a whole had a 4% increase, but actually the BRICS countries as a whole and Japan had a 10 to 13% decrease, meaning that even if those countries managed to patent a lot into green technologies, also leaders countries started patenting a lot, and therefore in terms of revealed technological advantage, OECD countries are actually doing much better than the BRICS as a whole. So these two pieces of information led us to being interested in understanding what are the determinants of these dynamics. And for this reason, the objective of our paper is to examine how the different dimensions and characteristics of the technological regime has an impact on the innovative growth and catching up of countries in green technologies. And we consider the fact that the conditions of the technological regimes change over time, and therefore their impact change over time, but also that this condition can differ importantly across different groups of countries. And this might actually cause changes in leadership, in technological leadership in particular, into green technologies. What we aim at doing in this particular analysis is distinguishing between countries that were initially leaders in green patenting, they will be called leaders throughout the papers, and countries that have actually engaged in the process of catching up. And as a result of this process, they entered the group of top patenting countries. These are the successful latecomers and are identified in our analysis with China, South Korea, and Taiwan, although there are important differences across the three countries. We do claim in the analysis that technological regimes are not constant over time, but they change. And the changing conditions actually allow both for changes in leadership among incumbents and for technological catching up by successful latecomers. So you might have also catching up among incumbent countries. Um, Now, whenever we think about green innovations, and as I've understood you, some of you at least are dealing with this, it's always important to remember why green innovation are relevant, and in particular, what is special about green innovations as opposed to, let's say, more standard innovation. Now, first of all, green innovations tend to have a much higher social value than innovation in the traditional dirty, if you want, fossil fuel technologies. And this has been discussed at length by many contributions into the literature. Second, they produce positive externalities, not only in the production phase, which is a process which is very common to the traditional technologies as well, but also in the diffusion stages, which explains why typically green technologies are more expensive than traditional fossil fuel-based technologies. This is a very well-known issue called the double externality, and this entails important implications when we think about the process of catching up of different countries into these technological areas. Um, Green innovation and green technologies tend also to be much more risky and uncertain than traditional investment. This is because they concern technologies that are in a very initial stage of development and do not really exhibit increasing returns that instead characterize the more established fossil fuels technologies. And therefore, the extent to which companies or other organizations might want to invest into these technologies, of course, is conditioned by the very high risk that these technologies entail. Fourth point, and this is something that we stress a lot in the paper and also in the empirical analysis, green technologies are much more complex than traditional technologies, and they do entail a higher degree of novelty. This means that the best practices and trajectories around green technologies are not well established. And of course, this also has implications in terms of catching up processes by different countries. Finally, green technologies tend to be much more expensive than existing fossil fuel technologies. And in particular, they do have a long payback period for the investment. The costs associated to green technologies are very often irreversible. And again, this makes the investment by companies and by other organizations particularly troublesome and difficult. Okay, so green innovation shares some features with the traditional innovation, but do have also important differences that make them particularly interesting to be studied if one is interested in the process of catching up, of technological catching up by different countries. Now, our idea is to understand to what extent the conditions of technological regimes affect the growth of patenting into green technologies. We also need to understand what is the relationship between the green catch up and technological regimes. And we do see that the pace at which different countries engage into the process of greening of their economy depends very much on the overall level of technological development, but also on the extent to which countries are able to accumulate knowledge and competencies in very specific areas. Um, Firms that aim at catching up into different technological domains need to engage in a very long process of learning and accumulation of different type of capabilities, absorptive, organizational, and technological capabilities. And clearly the extent to which companies are able to engage and to benefit from this process of learning depends very much on the context. And when we talk about the context, we talk about the country level context in terms of technological development, innovation systems, and institutions. So that there are patterns that are specific to companies and to technologies, but that they are embedded into very specific country context. So in our analysis, we do look at a set of dimensions of the technological regimes. And in particular, we look at the role of technological opportunity in a specific domain, where technological opportunity is basically the growth of patents, at cumulativeness, so the extent to which new knowledge builds on existing pieces of knowledge, on the originality of the technological domain, on the extent to which the technological domains are complex. So the knowledge comes from different backgrounds, different pieces of knowledge and competencies, at the stock of knowledge, and finally at the technology cycle. So how long is the technological cycle of a specific technology? These are the dimension of the technological regimes that we considered into our analysis. However, we do implement two novelties into the analysis. The first one, and this is actually quite a novel approach, is that we assume that technological regime changes and evolves over time, which means that the conditions of the technological regimes might change, and therefore they might have an impact on the catching up process in a very different way at different times. And therefore, in the analysis, we try to assess which of the dimensions are important as a whole, but also in specific points in time. Second, and I think this sheds lights on the way in which we can think of catching up, is that we do not consider only catching up by developing or industrializing countries, but we think also of processes of catching up among leaders, among incumbents. Okay, because advanced economies might lag behind in some specific technological areas. Okay, so catching up is not only the process that characterizes developing countries, but it might also characterize developed countries that want to catch up into green technologies and might lag behind some specific technological areas. And these, I think, are the two most relevant issues that we need to take into consideration when we consider the relationship between catching up on the one hand and technological regimes on the other hand. Okay, now some data and empirical evidence. I don't know how familiar you are with the patent analysis in green technologies, but what we basically selected are patents in climate change mitigation technologies that are the CPC classes YO2 and YO4. Down here, you have a table which depicts the different technological domains for the different codes. So we do have generally technologies for adaptation to climate change, technologies that relate to buildings, technologies that relate to capture, storage, and sequestering of greenhouse gases, climate change mitigation technologies that pertains to ICT. Then we do have, of course, the energy part of technological domains. We do have production processes. We do have climate change mitigation technologies related to the transport sector and to waste. And finally, we do have this YO4S class that pertains to the emergence of smart grids. Now, given that we want to understand the process of catching up in different contexts and in different sets of countries, we've decided to select USPTO patents in order to maintain some homogeneity in the quality of patents across different countries, considering that, of course, for example, Latin American countries, but to some extent also some Asian countries are more likely to patent at the USPTO than at the EPO patent office. We consider patent families, meaning that we are considering patents that have been applied for in different patent office as a single family. And therefore, we have a total of 447,675 patent families in 34 different technological classes related to climate mitigation technologies in 171 countries. We performed the analysis at the 8-digit classes, so we're going at the very disaggregated level of analysis, and we are considering the process of catching up over a long period of time between 1975 and 2015. We used the very last edition of PatStat, but given that there are some missing and also given that it takes time for patents that are applied for to be granted, we decided to keep the limit, let's say the final limit of our analysis to 2015. So this is how we're going to analyze the process of catching up. Okay, some first evidence on patent activities. In this table, you do see the number of patents applied for by leaders and what we call successful latecomers, which are South Korea, Taiwan, and China. You do see 3 different time horizons. So before 1976, between 1976 and 1999, and in the year 2000s. And in the last column, you do see the ranking of countries at 2015. Okay, so what we do observe, first of all, is that there is an important process of catching up of South Korea, which climbs the ranking up to the 4th position, so right after US, Japan, and Germany, but also by Taiwan, which ranks 6th in 2015, and China, which enters the top 10. The case of South Korea is particularly remarkable because if you look at the relative strength of South Korea patenting activity in green technologies, patents in South Korea were just 1.3% of the total US patents in the first period and are 14.5% in 2015. So we're talking really about an impressive growth. What is also interesting to notice is that even if Taiwan actually climbed up the ranking, Taiwan and South Korea had a very similar number of patents in the first period, but then in 2015, South Korea has twice as many patents as Taiwan. And this tells us that even within, let's say, a relatively similar group of countries, you do observe very different patterns when it comes to the process of catching up. Of course, in absolute numbers, China has also registered an impressive growth. It had just 72 patents filed at the USPTO in the first period, so before year 2000. And in 2015, it has more than 5,000 patents. And this, of course, speaks to a very impressive process of catching up, even if remember that in terms of ranking, China is doing worse than both South Korea and Taiwan. And what is also notable is that these three successful latecomers have actually taken the place of former leaders into the market. So this is the very first important piece of evidence that we do have on the patenting activity in the green technologies. There is also another important piece of evidence that pertains to the technological classes. Okay, so to the domain in which different countries patent. First of all, let me tell you that the two most important domains are the YO2E, so the class pertaining to renewable energy, basically, and the YO2T, which is the class pertaining to transport. And you've probably well aware of the diffusion of electric vehicles technologies that, of course, have really spurred that technological domain, particularly in some countries. But what is interesting overall is that there is an increase in the number of technological classes in which the countries patent over time. And this clearly speaks to the increasing complexity of green technological domains. So not only countries tend to patent in many different domains, but within the single patents, we do observe an increase in the numbers of technological domains that are involved. And it is important to notice that while for successful latecomers, so South Korea, Taiwan, and China, there is a decrease in the number of classes in which they lag behind. So they managed to catch up even if they entered a higher number of classes. For most leaders, the opposite trend is true. Okay, so as the number of classes increases, they tend to lag behind in more classes. Of course, with the exception of US and Germany that are leaders and have actually increased the number of technological classes in which they are patenting. Okay. If you remember, we were not only interested in understanding the role of catching up among different set of countries, but also in understanding the changing characteristics of the technological regimes over time. And we've computed the different dimension of technological regimes for different time span, observing really an evolution into the main characteristics. So first of all, opportunity. Opportunity is simply the growth of patents in a specific domain, okay? An opportunity is actually flat until the year 2000, and then it increases massively. While cumulativeness has actually an opposite trend. So it's still flat until the year 2000, and then it goes down. And of course, this can be explained by the fact that as technological opportunity increases, there are more innovators entering the technological domains, and this by definition leads to much lower levels of cumulativeness. Second, it is very interesting to observe the evolution of complexity and originality, since I was mentioning this two as two very important characteristics of green innovation. We do see that both complexity and originality actually increase over time, and they do so more remarkably since the year 2000. Um, uh, we do have evidence that patents in green technologies tend to be progressively characterized by an increasing number of technological classes, which is in line with the idea that green technologies are much more complex and original than non-green technologies, okay, than standard innovation. So again, opportunity increases after 2000, cumulativeness tend to go down, complexity and originalities are always increasing, particularly so after the year 2000. The third interesting piece of evidence at the descriptive level for our analysis pertains to the technological cycle. And what we do observe is that the evolution of the technological cycle tend to follow very much what happens for opportunity and cumulativeness. So before 2000, the technological cycle tend to be very short. And this can be due to the fact that with low opportunity, patents tend to grow little, and therefore patenting companies tend to cite always the same patents, okay? Which means that the variable cycle decreases. After the year 2000, when opportunity increases remarkably, patents, of course, grow, green patents tend to grow, and they become very numerous. Also, remember that the number of classes, so the complexity, tend to increase. This means that the cycle increases, it gets longer, because companies tend to base their innovation on knowledge developed in patents that tend to be very far away in time. And therefore, technology cycle tend to be longer. So once again, we do observe a changing nature in the most relevant characteristics of the technological regimes when we consider different patenting periods over time. So we've estimated the relevance of the conditions of the technological regimes, so opportunity, cumulativeness, technological cycle, originality, complexity, and the stock of knowledge on the catching up. And we consider the catching up as the growth of patents country share in technological class J. Always remember these are 8-digit technological classes at time t. So this is the most relevant, let's say, relationship that we want to estimate. But of course, we need to control for a set of time varying country factors. And therefore, we include at the country level. So the main analysis is performed at the technological class level, but at the country level, we include in general the stock of knowledge. We include the share of patents in a specific technological class. We also include the share of non-business actors among patent applicants to account for the role of firms and non-firms innovators. Of course, we have standard control for GNI and population, and we also include variables that are specifically related to the greening of the different countries. And in particular, we include environmental R&D expenditure. We include an index of the environmental policy stringency to account for the role of regulation into innovation. We include variable accounting for the CO2 emissions per capita. And we include a variable related to the demand, in particular the share of renewable energies in total final energy consumption, because we believe that demand has an important role together, of course, with the technological characteristics into determining the process of catching up. Time, country, class, fixed effects are included, and we do have different set of estimations, but I don't want to go too much in detail on this because I want to show you the results. So these are different models that include a set of different variables. I'm showing you for the time being the results on the main variables, so on the variables of technological regimes. Remember that the dependent variable is always the growth of patent in a specific technological class. So as expected, technological opportunities stimulate the innovative activity and the process of catching up in terms of growth of green patents. We do observe a negative sign, although the significance changes across different models of cumulativeness. And the idea is that catching up tend to be much harder when technological domains are characterized by innovation that build upon the existing knowledge. So it's much harder for new innovators to catch up with the existing knowledge. Um, Originality has a positive effect, which means that growth in patents is more likely to happen if the knowledge associated to a specific technological class is generic and it speaks to broader, let's say, domains. Complexity is also positive coefficient. This is very interesting. And this is related a little bit to the effect of originality as well. So we do observe that catching up, the growth of patents is higher in technologies, in technological domain that have a broader scope and a very wide variety of knowledge. One of the most interesting results we have is related to the technological cycle. And you do observe a positive sign of the technological cycle, which is also significant across different models. And the interpretation of this result is that the longer is the cycle, the higher the increase of in patents. Therefore, this means that more mature technologies tend to be less risky and knowledge is clearly more consolidated so that countries actually might find it easier to catch up. And finally, the stock of knowledge negatively affect the increase in the share of green patents. This is very typical of catching up. So the more knowledge has been accumulated in a specific technological domain, the more difficult it is to patent new and original knowledge in that particular domain. As I was telling you, technological regime variables might change over time. So here we have distinguished between two periods, 1975 to 2000 and 2001 to 2015, again, different specifications. And we do see interesting changes across the two periods. Opportunity, for example, is always significant, but the coefficient is much higher in the second period. And this is in line with the evidence that the growth of innovative activity after the year 2000 has been quite remarkable. And the same happens with originality, which tend to be not significant in the first period, while it has a very strong impact on catching up in the second period. As far as cumulativeness is concerned, if you look at the table, it becomes significant only in the second period, which means that as time goes by, the existence of persistent innovators in green technologies and the cumulativeness of technology tend to limit the opportunity for catching up by newcomers. And finally, the stock of knowledge in the first period has a positive sign, meaning that it stimulates the growth in the share of patents. And this is because at the very beginning, the amount of knowledge which is developed in relation to a technological class tend to be relatively small. And for the development of additional knowledge at the margins, if you want, helps country engage into innovative activity, while in the second period, the amount of knowledge tends to be quite substantial and therefore hinders the development of additional new and original pieces of knowledge. And therefore, the role of the stock of knowledge on the process of catching up is actually quite different from the first to the second periods. Some reflections on the control variables whose signs tend to be quite expected. So in terms of the share of a country into technological domains, what you see is that there is a very traditional negative sign, which means that the further a country is away from the position of leadership, the easier it is for that country to increase the share of patents. The extent to which a country has a stock of knowledge accumulated in a specific technological domain actually affects positively the growth of patents in that domain. We do find a very interesting result in relation to the share of non-business actor because the growth in green technological domains, so the process of catching up is actually negatively correlated to strong presence of companies. And this speaks to the fact that the role of private actors in green technologies is not so strong as opposed to the role of universities or other governmental institutions. Demand is relevant. You do see that there is a positive coefficient of the consumption of renewable energy over total consumption, and this is in line with lots of recent literature on the diffusion of green technologies. And finally, an interesting result pertains to the role of environmental policy stringency, this EPS here, which has a positive impact on the growth of green patents in line with the literature related to the Porter hypothesis that shows how environmental regulation might actually be an important trigger for innovation into the green domains. Okay, so to conclude, we've seen that the increase in a country green patent share is much stronger in domains where opportunity is high, complexity and originality are high, and technological cycles tend to be long, while the stock of knowledge has a negative effect on catching up. However, we've also shown that there are relevant changes over time in the role of variables, particularly in the stock of knowledge, in originality and cumulativeness. We also find that the share of green patents and the stock of knowledge that has been accumulated in a country have a very positive effect on catching up. And on the contrary, there is a negative effect of the role of non-business actors in favor of a positive effect for universities and other governmental institutions. Demand is very relevant. The literature has very much highlighted the fact that it's not just technological opportunities that matters, but it's also the market, as well as the environmental regulation. So the more stringent environmental regulation is, the easier it is to catch up for different countries. And this also is related to the fact that countries can exploit different market if their products and processes are actually compliant with stringent environmental regulation. Um, the growth of green innovations, so the catching up process, has been quite substantial in the three most successful latecomers countries, South Korea, Taiwan, and China. And these countries have actually replaced some of the initial leaders. What are the conditions that have favored this process of catching up? Well, first of all, the role of R&D and technological capability accumulation by local companies, but also the public support of the development of local technological capabilities through the implementation of regulation and other important policies. And there have also been the development of very innovative modes of knowledge transfer between public and private actors and between foreign and local actors that have really spurred the development of innovative activities into these countries. Important policy implications related to our analysis. Well, first of all, there is an important need for policies and for policymakers to pay attention to the specific learning and knowledge context that characterizes different sectors. Um, it's important to support local firms' capabilities and R&D, but it's also important that policies develop actions related to the strengthening of the dimensions of the technological regimes that are important for a successful process of catching up. In particular, technological opportunity, we've seen that this is a crucial variable for catching up, and you can actually stimulate conditions of technological opportunities by supporting basic research and the development of a knowledge infrastructure. At the same time, complexity plays a very relevant role, and complexity can be stimulated by supporting the formation and the training of advanced human capital and researchers that are able to handle and integrate, coordinate different types of knowledge so that they can actually help firms and other organizations to patent in very different technological domains. Finally, the conditions of technological regimes change over time, and the extent to which these conditions impact the process of catching up change over time. And therefore, policies need to be flexible, need to be very adaptive to the changing conditions, and need to be very responsive. And I think this is one of the most relevant implications of our work. So do not consider technological regimes as a set of conditions that is constant over time, but think about technological regimes as a set of very evolving, changing conditions that really requires policymakers to understand those changes and develop policies that are in tune with the changes of the context. And with this, I want to thank you very much for your attention. And of course, I'm open to comments, questions, any kind of interaction you might want to have.